of them reaching out for that final moment. And it is incredibly visible and quite a sight, I think, as it comes through the streets.
Astonishing. And people mainly here silent, but there's been clapping, cheering, throwing of flowers. People really wanting to show their appreciation as well as pay their respects.
I think so, and I think there is such an acknowledgement that many different people will be feeling many different things today, but I think everyone will acknowledge this sense of change and this sense that this is an absolute moment of history, and whatever the reason people are there in the crowds or watching from home, they know there's they are
flowers.
watching.
There's a clutch of flowers. And just to, if people do know the location, and just to update them on the timings, that is the cortege, the procession, moving along the Great West Road to the west of London, clearly, as it is in the name. It will then move onto the Great Southwest Road. It will skirt, ultimately, Heathrow Airport through Staines and then here to Windsor, whereas Laura was telling us it will stop at Albert Road, and a procession will take place from Shore Farm Gate down the Long Walk to the gates of Windsor Castle, where it will then be met again by members of the royal family, who will process down through the quadrangle to the west steps of St George's Chapel, and that service of committal. I want to get the perspective now of the author and historian Sir Anthony Seldon, who's been with us, of course, for much of our coverage over the last 10 days. And Sir Anthony, before we talk about the history of the chapel, what about the history of right now? Put it into perspective for us. The funeral, the procession, what we have seen and what we're seeing now.
Well, we're seeing the Queen coming back to this extraordinary, picturesque castle, the castle put up almost 1,000 years ago at a bend in the River Thames. Why? To protect London. Here she is coming back where so many other monarchs have been buried, all since George III, apart from Queen Victoria, who's buried nearby. So this was the castle that protected London, protected the kingdom, and she is going to be buried here, and she will still be protecting London and the kingdom.
And on the crowds, if we needed any reminder of just how supremely popular Her Majesty was, there it is.
I think this is really extraordinary, Dermot. I didn't expect to see so many on this route. One of the reasons why it was preferred, I understand, to have a procession by car rather than by train was it allowed access. That was a bit of a gamble, perhaps, because maybe not enough people would come out. They'd come to London, certainly, to Windsor, certainly, but in that long journey in between, that is saying a great deal about her hold on the nation, and it's asking questions of us. What does the monarchy mean when we have a democracy? Would they be doing this for a king? Well, we did for Winston Churchill when he died in 1965, but we heard an American there saying, oh, you wouldn't find this if an American president died. Why not? Because they were head of state, like the Queen. It's a partisan head of state. You're a Republican or you're a Democrat. You represent part of the nation, not all the nation. And an unelected monarch can represent all the nation, or all those who choose to give their loyalty to them.
I'm interested in what you say there, Sir Anthony, about, what is the relationship with the democracy. Well, didn't Her Majesty make it quite clear? You basically stay out of it. We didn't know what her opinions were. Of course, it's very different with King Charles, but doesn't he have to follow more or less the same pattern, or will he approach it in a different manner?
Well, she absolutely did stay out of it, and when she touched the history of the nation, as she did when she went to Ireland in 2011 with that magnificent gesture of peace and reconciliation, given all the troubles towards Ireland itself, or just putting a little oar in the water in the referendum on Scotland in 2014, but it's just a touch of a tiller. She has stayed out, and because of that, we've all been able to love her. Charles, a different kind of monarch, but the monarchy is different. The monarch is like the chair of a board. The prime ministers come and go, 15 for Queen Elizabeth, who knows how many for Charles. They've got their short-term partisan interests, but the monarch cares for the fabric, cares for the history, the tradition, the future. So issues like, say, the environment that might not be immediately on the interests of a prime minister because it goes on beyond the next general election. The monarch somehow holds the whole of the nation together as the custodian. I think we have a custodian monarchy.
There's a fascinating historical link coming up as we watch that journey of the State Heiress carrying Her Majesty the Queen's coffin to Windsor Castle, that as part of that journey, it hasn't got there yet, on the rather unprepossessing now A308, that runs alongside the Thames, which Sir Anthony, of course, takes it past Runnymede.
Yes.
And all the resonances there of King John and Magna Carta, and that then started to establish the relationship between the monarchy and the people.
It did, and we then had in 1265 a Parliament meeting in the very place where she has been lying in state for the last 4 years, Westminster Hall, and also Runnymede, well known to the Americans because President Kennedy went there, so a lot of a sense of history of the Anglo-American relationship, so important. George III, buried here, was the monarch from whom the Americans broke away in 1776. But also the River Thames. It's an artery almost like no other river in any country. Our history has been dotted along that. The Tower of London, Westminster Palace, Hampton Court Palace, and here Windsor. They're all on the Thames. It's the essential artery through which British history has flowed for centuries.
Why so? Just because it was I suppose, the safest and the most efficient way of travelling.
Safest, and if you could hold the capital, you could hold the river, you could hold the kingdom.
Laura, let's talk now about St George's Chapel here at Windsor Castle. Of course, we were last here for another sad event. As I said, it was only 17, nearly 18 months ago when Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, was laid to rest. And who can forget? I mean, it was during those COVID restrictions, and who can forget that? I mean, the searing scene of Her Majesty the Queen sitting on her own in a mask as she said farewell to her husband of 74 years.
It was quite a sight, and I think no one will ever forget that moment as she sat there silently and alone. It was such a moment, wasn't it? Interestingly, one of the pieces of music that was sung at that service we will hear again today, a beautiful, in a way, echo to that service, which must have meant so much in such a strange time to the Queen as well. And I think the service we will see here later is meant to be that reflective, that family, that personal event after the great ceremony of the Abbey. And although there are 800 people here, everyone here, I think, the majority of the congregation has that personal connection with the Queen, her staff, who would have worked with her, many of whom for decades, past staff, present staff as well. And it was so interesting watching them coming into the chapel where they're now waiting in that congregation. They will have known her quite intimately, many of them, for so long. And the idea now that this is the moment for the family, the national, the international service we've seen now moves to the more personal here.
And Sarati, I mean, that's the thing about Windsor Castle, isn't it? I remember coming here for the first time as a young student, actually, to have a look around. And I was just taken by how actually small and intimate it is, and the fact that, you know, there are, I mean, looking at this position we are in for Sky News, there are people living here, there are front gardens. I saw someone walking their dog 2 hours ago. It's a strange mix.
A lot of people live here. Laura was talking about all those people who owe so much to her. We don't hear a story of her treating those people rudely, nothing but civility and kindness. That says so much about who she is when so many leaders are around the world arrogant and unkind to those who work for them. But yes, isn't this extraordinary? You couldn't make up. I'm wondering what people from around the world are thinking as they're watching the scenes of Westminster Abbey this morning and the Mall and past Buckingham Palace and then this. 1,000 years old, the Motte and Bailey Castle, originally with William I, and then the Long Walk, where Henry VIII on the Mound reputedly waited for news about the execution of Anne Boleyn. Charles I holed up here, imprisoned during the Civil War, later buried here. I mean, the history of our nation flows through every bit of brick and mortar and stone here.
Just want to focus again on the extraordinary scenes we are seeing on that journey. It should take, something under an hour on a clear road, certainly from central London to Windsor, where there is scarcely a gap along some long stretches of dual carriageway, as you can see there, and in places, in many, many places, the crowd's 10, 20, 30, 40 deep, but so many people wanting to turn out. Some people saying, well, look, we wanted to go to the lying-in state, but we heard about the 12-hour, the 16-hour queues, and we just didn't think we could do that. So we've come here instead just to catch a glimpse, just to let that sink in, that this has actually happened. The Elizabethan age, the second Elizabethan age is over, Laura.
It certainly is, and the connection, I think, we're talking about Windsor here, it is obviously the place of kings and queens and the like in the past, but for the Queen herself, such strong personal connections as well. And you remember the time her and her sister Margaret spent here as young princesses, a young teenage Princess Elizabeth coming here during the war, the stories of the pantomime performances the pair made here, right the way through past that broadcast as they spoke to the children of the Commonwealth from Windsor Castle, up until recent months and lockdown and the pandemic. It is a home. It is the place she always wanted to come to at weekends, and I think genuinely a place she felt she could relax as well.
There's a lovely story told, isn't there, about when we hear the committal service and we hear that organ music, that haunting organ music, that as a child, as a teenager, the organist was Sir William Harris, then here at Windsor Castle in St George's Chapel, that he taught piano to the Queen. She used to go up to the organ loft to listen to him. Just some marvellous memories and resonances, I suppose.
They called him Doc H, Sir William Harris, and he apparently gave the two princesses piano lessons. They would also take part in singing with him, I'm told, inside the castle in those difficult years in the war when they were here, and they would sing in his choir. But certainly a huge affection for him, and I think the fact a lot of his music, a lot of his arrangements will be played and heard in this service, I think will certainly have the stamp of the Queen on it. It was somebody she would have known very well.
So, Anthony, what about the changing mores of funerals? And I don't know what happened at Queen Victoria's funeral, but would there have been cheering then and throwing of flowers? We've evolved, haven't we, to make celebration part of it as well.
Yes, but there would have been more formal clothes. Many people in hats, women in hats, men in hats. But inside they would have felt, I'm sure, the same mix of feelings, of sadness, of awe, that they didn't want to miss out, that they'd have known that if they weren't here, others would have said that you missed something that you'll remember for the rest of your lives. So change, but also lots of the same feelings from people as we see them there. And just on Laura there, you can imagine the Queen looking out, can't you, from the castle here, out across London, being blitzed and seeing the red glow of the flames from the docks of London and the city of London. And that's another reminder, as it will be for so many in the crowds, how deep she goes back into our national histories and the lives of our own families.
And what a day it has been and is still going to be. It's this, well, what we saw in central London, the funeral, the state funeral, the scale, the majesty of that. Yet there was a gentleness and precision as well. And then this is a more natural, organic event, but nevertheless there's still that mix coming across. We've got the scale of the crowds, but the genuine love coming across.
And an utter lack of ego in the service. The story was told by the magnificence, the eternal beauty of the abbey and the music and the customs and the traditions. No one needed to assert themselves or to make points. Kings and presidents just quietly taking their place in their pews as if they were learning from her example, that if you want to be loved as a leader, be a servant leader, don't be a brutal leader.
Laura, you mentioned it earlier. We're keeping eyes, of course, we're focusing naturally on the state hearse and the coffin carrying Her Majesty the Queen towards Windsor Castle. But here you mentioned that the Royal Standard is flying, it's fluttering high above Windsor Castle. And just explain to us the significance of this. It seems strange to many people that any flag should be flying, especially one before a committal service, at full mast.
The Royal Standard has always flown at full mast and shows that the monarch is present. We've seen it flown as the King made his dash around the nations, and here, for the very first time since George VI, the Royal Standard now raised here in Windsor for a king, something we haven't seen in the country for 7 decades, but flying here, and it is quite a sight. It's absolutely enormous. I mean, strangely, when the Union flag was here, it was barely fluttering, wasn't it, when it was half-mast, but now the Royal Standard at full mast is absolutely huge. It could be seen, I imagine, probably from quite some way away as well.
Indeed, and signifying, as you say, that the King is now present at Windsor Castle, his family alongside him, who will greet the coffin as it is brought to Windsor Castle and then taken to St George's Chapel, to the Queen's final resting place. We can see behind us as well the Guard of Honour forming up, the members of staff as well, lining Chapel Hill, where the coffin will process towards the west steps of St George's Chapel. And Sir Anthony, I wanted to talk in a bit more detail about St George's Chapel. It's then as old as the castle, but like the rest of the castle, it's evolved. In other words, it's had bits tacked on over the centuries.
Like all our great religious buildings, they have been extended, added to, knocked down. Fire has required replacement, but essentially a 15th century late perpendicular Gothic building with that most wonderful vaulting, as we'll see inside, the fan vaulting, and the final resting place of 10 monarchs. So all monarchs will see in a moment the statue for George III at the end of the Long Walk. He's buried there, and then every monarch from George III onwards except Victoria. So Queen Elizabeth will be the 11th monarch here, and it is the most, it's smaller, only 800, is it, Laura, in the service today compared to Westminster Abbey, which itself is not a large religious building compared to many, with 2,000 there. So intimate, personal, dearly loved by her in her own life.
Well, as we watch the state hearse slowly making its way towards Windsor Castle on its final journey, as we've told you, it will stop just under a mile away from the castle itself at the end of the Long Walk, where a procession will form, where the crowds, I know, are gathering in many, many thousands, awaiting that procession down the Long Walk into Windsor Castle, where it will be met by members of the royal family and taken then to St George's Chapel for the committal service. My colleague Kay Burley is standing by there for us on the long walk. And Kay, just tell us about the numbers there.
Dermot, yeah, some 97,000 people were expecting, to be precise, along the long walk here, 4.2 kilometres long. It was originally designed as a shortcut, if you will, for the royal family to get to Ascot races. And oh my goodness me, have Her Majesty's subjects turned out in force to pay their final respects. So many youngsters, actually. I've just seen the smallest baby I've ever seen, who's just been put back into his pram for a little sleep, but also lots of young people around waiting for that moment when they can wave their flags and pay their final respects along with their families to Her Majesty. Let's just have a quick chat with some lovely people here. Hello, hi, you're live on Sky News at the moment. May I ask you why you've decided to come today?
It's a real honour being here. We've come to show our respects to Her Majesty the Queen. We've come with a family. We really appreciate the work that King Charles has done for the Syriac Orthodox Church. It's been invaluable to us. Darren, you want to say anything?
Yeah, again, just with the family, come to show our respects. Obviously, it's a momentous day, so yeah, really thankful.
And Mum, how impressed are you by the number of people that have turned out?
It's unbelievable. I'm shocked. I'm shocked with the way you have organised the audience being here. So it's a pleasure. It's an honour being here as well. So
What
yeah.
did Her Majesty mean to you?
Oh, everything. It's a lot. It's a lot to us. Yes. I mean, since I was a child, she was in my heart. So yeah.
She's been the one constant, hasn't she, in all of our lives?
She has. She has. It's an honour to, at least if I can just see tiny things of her. So yes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's chat to another couple of people. Hi, you're live on Sky just at the moment. Hello, hi. Tell me why you decided to come along today.
So actually here traveling for work, but wanted to come here specifically.
That's an American accent, is it?
I am, yes,
Okay,
from
where are you
Columbus,
from?
Ohio.
Okay.
So here, it's just been, I think it's an honor to be here to pay respect to the Queen. I've been a royal watcher since I was a little girl. I woke up and watched the royal wedding, and just always been a fan of Princess Diana and her story. So here today to honor the whole family and just pay deep respect, and what a privilege to be here. And it's such a historic moment. You just had to be here.
Not long now before we see the Queen pass by for the final time as she's reunited with her beloved Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. We have seen quite a lot of pageantry, haven't we? We've seen the military processing to and fro.
Yes, we actually had the pleasure of seeing them do a little rehearsal in Windsor right before we walked in, so we get to see a double take with them coming through on the final mile here. So there's just nothing like this in the U.S., so it's just such a privilege for us to be here, part of the pageantry, and just all that this means to everyone here. It's obvious she was so beloved. I mean, the crowd is deep, and it's everyone of all ages, and I think it's total homage to her. It's who she was as a person, and we're just thrilled to be here.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank
I wonder
you.
if I could just possibly speak to this gentleman who is from the first Chippenham Sky.
First Sippenham.
Do beg your pardon. Tell me why you decided to come along.
The Queen was the patron of Scouting, and I think it's important to respect what she's done for us. She's such an icon for the country, for everyone to rally behind, and I just wanted to show my support today.
And the Scouts did so much good work, didn't they, during the lying-in state? So many of them were working long shifts in order to make sure everybody was kept safe and the crowds moved along as quickly as they could. What about today? Again, very impressive by the way the people have been organised around. Everybody seems relaxed and keen to pay their last respects to the Queen.
Yes, and I think everyone has come together as a country. We can it's almost British culture to do things properly and with respect and organisation, and massive shout out to the guys that have organised it. They've done a massive, really, really good job, and I don't think anyone in the country could do anything without our organisation like this.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for speaking. Sippenham, do forgive me. Thank you very much indeed. So Her Majesty making her way now to Windsor. It won't be very long before she reaches us here on the main roads, coming along the A4 from home that she called the office, actually, at Buckingham Palace in London, to Windsor, where she has lived for many years. I wonder if I might be able to just have a very quick word with this lovely lady. Beautiful dress. Thank you for joining us. Why did you decide to come along today?
It was just a momentous occasion. occasion, an historical event. We all want to be part of it. I mean, she was such a lovely lady. Nobody has a single bad word to say about her, and we just want to come in and join and pay our respects.
Can you see from where you are?
We're not too far away, but tiptoeing up, you can actually see. I think we'll be able to see the hearse going past, which is something we'll be able to sort of remember forever and tell our children and grandchildren about. The crowds are immense today. There's a lot of people here, but they're all sort of here to pay their respects and doing really well, giving everybody space, letting us come through as well, which is really nice.
Hopefully you get a good view.
Hopefully we're trying our best to sort of squeeze in wherever we can.
Goodbye. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Dermot, as I was saying, maybe 6, 7, 8 deep, and then there are other people that are mingling further back, a little bit further back from the long walk, sitting with their children, waiting for that announcement that the hearse has joined the long walk, and then I'm sure they will be moving further forward, children on their parents' shoulders, trying to get that moment that they'll remember forever, where they were when the Queen passed by for a final resting place. Dermot.
Kay, thank you so much, and you're right about the approach of the hearse towards Windsor Castle. We can tell here in the quadrangle itself because the Guard of Honour's lined up, their bodyguards lined up on the parade ground as well, and the timings, if they stick to them, which they have been, we are expecting the coffin to arrive on the long walk for that procession about 3:10. Then it will be met here in Windsor Castle at the gates of Windsor Castle and taken down then through the quadrangle, Engine Court, through the ancient Norman Arch, down Chapel Hill, past the parade ground, which we of course will be showing you right here on Sky News, into Horseshoe Cloister, and then borne in through the West Steps into St George's Chapel. The King and other members of the royal family, they've made their way here from Westminster Abbey. They will walk in procession and will join the coffin in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle. That will be led by a dismounted detachment of the Household Cavalry Regiment. Behind that will be a smaller procession, of course, than we saw from the Abbey, but nevertheless quite remarkable. Behind the Household Cavalry will be a mounted division of the Sovereign's Escort, then the massed pipes and drums of Scottish and Irish regiments, the bands of the Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Household Cavalry, and then followed by kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms and members of the Queen's personal staff. Some sense there of the preparations for the reception of Her Majesty the Queen, and Kay made the point there in the castle that she called the office, and Sir Anthony Selden, the historian, as you know, is with me, the office. That is self-explanatory, Sir Anthony, where she rolled her sleeves up and got down to work. But also there's a kind of hierarchy, isn't there, in terms of the palaces which the Queen loved so much. Balmoral, her beloved Balmoral, of course, where she passed away. But did she prefer it? Seems so, Windsor Castle to Buckingham Palace, both very accessible when it comes to her duties in the capital.
Well, she was a woman who loved animals, loved the open air, loved walking her dogs, loved being amongst horses, and it's difficult to do that in Buckingham Palace, although it does have the biggest private garden anywhere in London. But up in Balmoral in Scotland, she could really feel at ease and at peace away from the cares of office, although she always had her papers with her and was always working away. But she could relax, and she could relax more here, and such long memories going back to the very beginning of her life here. We were talking there about how she could watch and see the fires burning over London during the Second World War, memories of being with her beloved father, George VI, and mother, Elizabeth, and sister Margaret. Very special to her. So this is where she wanted to have as her place that she could be in the last years of her life, from 2011 onwards.
Laura, give me your thoughts about what we saw in London, the pomp, the ceremony in the Abbey itself, that then procession up to Wellington Arch.
It was incredible, wasn't it? And I think the kind of thing we will only see once, really, on such a huge scale. But the contrast, I think, is so striking. And what I think will stick in the memory is the beginning of the day, looking like that, the procession through central London. And it's almost like there is a sigh of relief to some extent as the Queen's coffin makes its way back here, home to Windsor Castle, the place where we know she could relax. She spent the last few years certainly living here permanently throughout the pandemic, the Windsor bubble, when she was here. And I think the very fact that at the end of the day there will be, with no cameras, no congregation, most of the crowds here I think will have gone to a private family burial inside that King George VI Memorial Chapel, inside this chapel here. It just completes the symmetry of the day, really, from the high ceremony right back when behind the walls no one will see, just the family gathered, as we've seen the funeral of a monarch and then the burial of a much-loved family member.
And it's that tapering of the day's ceremonies, isn't it? From the might of a state funeral, it gets smaller all the time. We get this service, the committal service, and then quite rightly, the eyes of the world are shut out. This evening, it's a family event.
And I think that's how the Queen lived her life, this hugely public figure watched by the world wherever she went. And yet there were moments, perhaps many of them spent here at Windsor, that were private moments, moments with her family. We've heard, haven't we, from the Earl and Countess of Wessex speaking how much time she spent with their children and how special those moments were. And I think these private family moments are why the very final laying to rest of the Queen will be such a quiet, such a personal moment, so intimate for the family, given the huge amounts of international interest in everything here.
And on the family side of it, you mentioned that, the tributes by her three sons and her daughter, and they've come out during the course of the last 10 days, and each one giving us a slightly different perspective on a mother.
Yes, and it's interesting, staggered subtly throughout the last few days, but each one a nod to a mother, mama or mummy, and their own personal thoughts at this huge moment of grief, really, for each of them. Obviously, as King Charles now, head of the family, the monarch, and each of them saying and vowing they will carry on to support him. And I think that family support will be so important to him as he now is monarch. Royal standard flying here at Windsor for him for the first time. And the messages with personal thoughts, personal memories from each of the Queen's children, but very much ending all of them on that nod to the King and that nod to God save the King, as many of them said, and the continuity of it all.
And watching the procession, and we also had a split screen for you a moment or two ago showing you the scene on the Long Walk, which is self-explanatory. It leads its long way to the gates of Windsor Castle itself, the thousands of people there lining the route, and we understand that the hearse is not too very far away before we see then the coffin. It'll take a little while, but we will see it for one last time as members of the public before it's brought here to the St George's Chapel for this committal service. And Sir Anthony, on that issue of family, it's so strange for a royal family, and that attempt, was it successful to connect more with their public, to say, well, there are elements of us that are just like you. We're not as distant and remote as those of our predecessors and our ancestors, but nevertheless, there has to be some mystery as well.
So her early advisors who had served her father George VI and indeed grandfather George V, very much of the opinion that the monarchy and the family have to remain very private. But the influence of her husband, Duke of Edinburgh, and other forces, modernising forces, saying no, to survive, to continue to appeal, to capture the interest and the love of the nation, we have to be out there. We have to show ourselves. A very controversial BBC film in, was it 1969? And some people said, you know, that would be the death of the monarchy because the mystique, the aura was gone. If you saw the Queen with bangers at a barbecue, putting them on a plate, I mean, what left is there for the monarchy? What's the mystique and the aura? And yet it worked, and it did help us to get inside. The downside is that the tensions, the poor behaviour are magnified, and we all see it, not just in this country, but all around the world also. So it was a risk, not without some bad moments, but it was a necessary risk, and it's got us today and to this week, to the fact that the attention of the whole world are watching this event like nothing else in the 21st century. Well, certainly not since 9/11.
All focus, of course, on Her Majesty the Queen, but just a thought on that. For the King, how does he maintain that level of affection?
By being himself, not by being her, and making his own connection, and seeing him walk around, seeing his delight and joy at the way that people have responded to him, having Camilla by his side, clearly the woman he's loved all his life, there watching every move, guiding and shaping him, is essential. He will find his own way. He is in tune with many of the spirit of this century, not least the whole green agenda, the whole mental health issue, the development of the whole child rather than just the concentration on exams. He's deeply emotionally intelligent, and he does care, as we were saying earlier. He cares for this nation and the fabric of this nation and the long-term survival of this nation in a way that a come-and-go Prime Minister can never do.
I want to talk now to our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, who has, of course, been taking us through the day's remarkable ceremonies, and, as I say, more to come. And, Alistair, at the moment, we are seeing Her Majesty's coffin being borne in procession towards Windsor Castle, towards the chapel where she will ultimately rest alongside her husband and other members of her family. And at the moment, then, we are seeing that transition. This is still for the people of the United Kingdom, and indeed those who've travelled here from around the world, to still pay their personal respects to Her Majesty. But ultimately, by the end of the day, she'll be resting in the bosom of her family.
The Queen is approaching now through the home park in this great park of Windsor. And the great park, which has been really home to the Queen so much through her reign, and before it, during the war, when she came here with her sister, Princess Margaret. And it was to this place of safety that the King and Queen kept them during the difficult times of the Blitz. But she approaches now Shaw Farm Gate, and the police will release her to the ceremonial that awaits. And we saw from that aerial view how the castle sits cresting the hill at the top of this long, slow ascent that we will see the Queen ultimately go up into the George IV gates and into the castle itself. But before that, a chance for the state hearse to pass by the household cavalry here waiting, the mass band of the pipes and drums. And